Hello, does anyone see me? All right, we'll get this started. Um, all right, so welcome back to BP Mindcast. So today, what I want to talk about this search for a universal algorithm. And so the title of this podcast is based on, the secret to Google's success. Why is Google doing great, and why is DeepMind a sideshow? And so this all ties into kind of some of the underpinnings of theoretical computer science. So in physics, we have pretty much any hard science has conservation laws, and that's really what separates out science from non-science is conservation laws. And what a conservation law does is it actually gives meaning to the rest of the science. So, for example, uh, in physics, you have the law of conservation of mass and energy, and it basically says that mass cannot be created or destroyed. Mass and energy cannot be created or destroyed, which is why you can't have perpetual motion machines. In fact, the patent office figured this out, and they stopped taking patents on perpetual motion machines. So, information theory has similar bounds, but there's not kind of a unified, agreed upon which one is the primary one. But they all kind of interlock. Wolpert and McReady have the no free lunch theorems. Um, there's the law of conservation of information, which has been espoused by a number of people. And so there's a lot of different conservation laws in computer science. But there's also, just like there was an endless search for the perpetual motion machine, in information theory, there's a continual search for the universal algorithm, the one that will do all the things, that will solve all the search problems, the artificial intelligence, which will solve all the data sets. And just like the perpetual motion machine, it doesn't exist. It's not just that we don't have good enough computers for it. It's not just that we haven't searched long enough. It's not that the program isn't long enough or that we don't have enough memory or computer power. The fact is that the nature of software itself doesn't allow for it. There is a law of conservation of information that does not allow you to have this unbounded growth, this program that writes the program kind of system. And so a lot of people who are wedded to artificial intelligence, who think that we are just meat machines or that artificial general intelligence is just around the corner, uh, Ray Kurzweil's singularity, those sorts of things. So those are just modern day perpetual motion machines. And everybody who thinks that they have the next great lead on it, and but the fact is that the basics of information theory tell you that it is not possible. So that's where I want to talk about Google and kind of its most recent offshoot, DeepMind. So Google has been successful. A lot of people think that Google is a big data company. And it's true that Google has a lot of data, but that actually wasn't what made them great. In fact, if you look back and the original Google database was fantastic and better than the others, even before it had crawled as many pages as the other search engines. So remember, Google was not the first search engine. You had Yahoo, you had Alta Vista, you had Excite, you had all sorts of other other systems that were out there. And Google was kind of the more recent one, and it had not crawled nearly as many pages, but the search results were fantastic. Well, why was that? Well, ultimately, what Google figured out is not how to search text, but how to harvest intentionality. If you look at all the great things that Google has done, all of the good ones that have succeeded are ones where they're able to identify intentionality and harvest that. So with the original PageRank algorithm, what it was doing is it was looking at links. And the reason it looks at links is that people might put any sort of word on a page, but rarely will they link to another site unless they really think that that other site is worthwhile. So Google was able to really harvest the intentionality of people, because the other thing is that people are more intentional if they like if I give myself a high five, a self five is not that's easy to do. It doesn't cost you anything. But to give someone else a high five, well, that's giving somebody else credit. And so if I give someone else credit, that requires a lot more intentionality than just giving myself credit. And so Google actually uh, they really came to life as intentionality harvesters. And all of the every time when Google leaps ahead of someone, that's usually what they're doing is they figured out a way to harvest intentionality. So whether it is, so the other thing on searches is that they figured out that they can use the users themselves to help uh, guide the search ranks. So a user will look at the title and the description of a link, and they'll decide whether that is appropriate to their search or not. Well, so what what Google will then do is use that intentional clicking behavior as a further signal to tell you whether or not this page is relevant to the query. And so over and over again, Google is harvesting intentionality in order to um, in order to improve their results. And so even before Google was big data, they already had a huge leg up because they could identify intentionality better than the other search engines. So even though Google has big data, I think it's a mistake to equate their success with being big data. But recently, a lot of the Google offshoots, especially DeepMind, have now gone off in the search for the universal algorithm. And DeepMind is the one that made a lot of headway with their with the release of their Alpha Zero product, which was able to play chess and win with very little uh, information about what with very little information about how to win. So it didn't start off. A lot of chess games start off with the opening playbook or um, all sorts of things, but Alpha Zero started out with nothing except basically the rules, and by playing itself, it figured out how to play better. So anyway, so that's a product of DeepMind. They're the group that did that. But what they're really aiming for is the universal algorithm. So let me give you a reason why these sorts of things, universal algorithms, um, seem like that they are always around the corner, but they never materialize. And the reason is simple. So in computer programming, you kind of have these two different ideas. There are axioms and there are theorems, right? And this is math too. This comes from math. The terminology comes from math. So axioms are fundamental truths, and theorems are what happen when you put a bunch of axioms together. And so what computers are great at doing is putting together lots and lots of axioms into theorems. What they really can't do is generate axioms on their own. And so the Gödel incompleteness theorem showed that there's actually an infinite number of axioms that we need in order to find the truth about mathematical properties of various numbers. So there's actually an infinite number of axioms that we might need. So we can never supply all of the axioms that something might need. So computer programs, since they are theorem generators, adding in, say, one really good axiom might generate 100,000 new great theorems. And that's really what machine learning does. Is machine learning is you throw in a new axiom and it produces theorems. But what computer programming can't do, and this is actually in the very nature of computers, computer programming can't develop axioms. And this comes out again, Gödel's incompleteness theorem is kind of a very abstract way of thinking about it, but a more practical one is Turing's halting problem, where he showed that you can't write a program which, in general terms, figures out when another program will ever finish, or if another program will ever finish. So this is why so I can't have a program that figures out if another program has an infinite loop, is really what it's saying. And then Rice's theorem is an extension of that, a generalization of it, that says really any long-term broad-scale property of a program that's interesting can't you can't figure it out algorithmically. Now, if this was true in general, we couldn't program computers. If it were true for humans as well, we couldn't program computers. But since humans are able to program computers and understand these sorts of things, that means that humans actually have an ability beyond computation. Um, that we have a higher intelligence that is able to generate these axioms that give us insight into additional classes of problems. And so basically what happens with artificial intelligence is that it grows according to the axioms that it has, but it kind of limits out. And then somebody figures out, you know what, this, if we added this one axiom, it would help us grow further. And so somebody adds in an axiom and it grows further. Now, one thing that's really cool about artificial intelligence is we've been able to figure out kind of what are the minimum axioms that you need to solve different classes of problems. And so it's been really cool to see, what sort of axioms do we really need to solve these problems? And so, like what AlphaZero showed, is that for a huge class of two-player games where you have total information about what's happening, for a huge class of those at least. They say for all, but I'm just I don't I couldn't verify that. So I'll just say for a huge class of games of that nature, all it needs is the rules. And once you give it the rules, it will then it then has the axioms, which are pretty minimal, that it needs to solve the game. And so anyway, it's a really it's interesting that given those constraints, you actually don't need very many axioms to solve the game. But that doesn't mean so. The thing is, though, is that once you expand out beyond that, you're going to need new axioms, and you will always need new axioms. And so that's the fundamental misunderstanding, because DeepMind's goal is to generate the universal algorithm. Well, the universal algorithm doesn't exist. There's actually a great paper called Few Algorithms. Here, what is it? It's called The Famine of Forte. Let's see here. Yeah, it's by George Montañez. It's The Famine of Forte. Few search problems greatly favor your algorithm. And basically, what it says is that if you find a good algorithm, well, there's a limit to the number of problems that this applies to. And so, anyway, it's a really great paper. It's pretty technical, but nonetheless, it describes the problem really well and shows why these ideas of universal algorithms don't work. So anyway, I thought I'd share that with you all, and just know that the search for the universal algorithm, the universal deep learning system, the program that makes the program, all of these are exactly the modern equivalent of looking for perpetual motion machines, and the end will be the same. Now, that being said, there might be interesting things we find along the way. Alchemy came out with great tools with which we later used for chemistry. So it's not that the search isn't all bad, but I just want you to know that the eventual outcome of all of them is that we will not have a universal algorithm because one cannot exist. So anyway, have a great day and keep thinking.